So now it's time to write some tests for our pagination class. Let's quickly create a new directory under tests unit. We are going to call it pagination. And within this directory, we are going to create a new class, which is going to be pagination case we're going to start with. And this is going to be an abstract class, which will extend our test case. And here we are going to start with a protected function setup. We're going to start with calling the parent setup, so parent setup. If there's any setup method in a parent class, call it first, and then we are going to make sure that our get superglobal is always reset to an empty array. So there are no values within this get superglobal stored before any test is run, so we can always have it as an empty get request. And let's just add quickly some dog blocks, set up, and returns void. And then we are going to create a method which will return an instance of the pagination. So public function pagination, and this method will take 3 arguments. First one will be records count, number of records in other words, then how many records per page, so per underscore page. By default we set it to 10, and then we're going to have key by default page. Now from within this method we simply return new pagination class, which we've created in the previous video, and we pass first of all request http illuminate http request, and then capture method which will return instance of this request. Then records count is the second argument, then we have per page, and lastly we have the key that we want to use. And let's just import all these classes. So this pagination, well, we've obviously need to add the dog blocks as well. Let's import this class now. Here, import class, there we go. So we can now remove all this. Also import this request. There we go, looks a little bit better. Make sure obviously both of these classes are fully referenced here at the top. So this method will return the instance of the pagination, so later on we can obviously write a test straight away for on this, based on this instance. Okay, let's add to this dog blocks, let's add some summary get instance of pagination. And for records count we expect integer, for per page we expect integer, key string, and then it returns pagination, so it's all good. Okay, let's save and close this pagination case, and now let's create pagination test. So pagination test, and this class will extend this pagination case. So now we know that before each of the tests within this class, we will always have our get superglobal reset to an empty array, and we will have this pagination method available. So when we call this pagination method with any of these arguments overwritten, then we'll get the instance of the pagination with these arguments passed through. So let's start with the first one. Public function returns correct offset. Let's make it a test. And now we start with get page. We're going to set to 3. So this would indicate that we're on the 3rd page. And now pagination equals this pagination method, 200 records we have, and then we want 10 records per page basically. So this assert equals, and it should equal 20 when we call pagination offset. And I'm not going to pass any third argument, this which is basically the message that we want to return if this test fails. It's not necessary, we will still know which test failed anyway. Okay, so let's just go through this once again. We're setting the page to the 3rd one. We know we're passing through 200 records, and we want 10 records per page. If we go back to this pagination method, all we do here is basically the 3 arguments that we pass through to this pagination method go as 2nd, 3rd, and 4th arguments to the pagination constructor, and the first one we just generate every time we create a new instance using this request capture, which returns instance of itself, this request class. Okay, so now if we go back to the pagination, let's check this offset method. What this offset does, it checks if the page we currently on is the first one, and if we go back, the condition that we have here, it won't be the first page because we're indicating that we're on the third page. So going back, then we check current page -1, so it would be 3 minus 1 should give us 2, and then multiplied by the number of record per page, which is 10, which is basically when we pass here this second argument to this method, which will be third argument for this pagination constructor, and the second argument set to 10. So 2 multiplied by 10 should give us 20. This is why we are asserting that this offset method should return 20. So let's quickly save it and open the terminal. And if we run PHP unit just on this specific test class, go to test, unit, pagination, and then pagination test. And we have a problem here, class pagination case not found, and this is because we haven't added this class to our composer JSON. So after our lookup model, comma, actually I'm going to duplicate this line and now use unit. We go to the pagination, then pagination case.php, save it, close it, open the terminal, and let's run composer dump auto load, and let's optimize it, so -o. And now if we run the test again, and there we go, we have one test, one assertion, which is passing. So this first test works just fine, so our offset has returned the correct integer. The next test is going to test for the limit method, so public function returns correct limit. And again, it's a test, so let's add the dog block here, test, tag. And we are going to start with a pagination equals this pagination with 200 records and say 99 per page. So this assert equals, this time should tell us 99 when we call pagination limit. And let's save it, and again let's go through this again. So limit method, if we go to this method, it simply returns whatever is associated with a per page property, and a per page property, if we go back to the constructor, is basically our third argument for the constructor. If we go back to our pagination case, third argument is the second argument that we pass to this pagination method, which is basically whatever we pass here, that's what this limit should return. So if we save it, run the test, and there we go, 2 tests, 2 assertions, all of which are passing. Back to our editor. The next one will check if the key is returned correctly as well. So if we go public function sets pagination key, and let's make it a test as well, scroll up a bit, sets pagination key, and we go for get pg, for instance, this time indicating the page, and then pagination equals this pagination. We're going to say we have 200 records, 10 per page, and the key we want to use is going to be pg. So this assert equals, and we're going to go for 20 this time when we call pagination offset, and also we're going to do another assertion, assert equals pg, when we call pagination key. Now let me just go through this once again. So we're setting the parameter pg to 3. We indicate that we want that we have 200 records, 10 records per page is what we want, and pg is the key that we should get the page number from. Then the first assertion checks whether the offset asserts that the offset should return 20. Again, looking at the what we have in the URL, we on the third page. Offset takes 1 away from this current page, so that would give us 2, multiplies the number of record per page, 10, so 2 times 10, that should give us 20. And then for the second assertion, we simply check that this key returns PG, which is what we passed through as an argument. Okay, let's run this test, back to the terminal, and there we go, 3 tests, 4 assertions, all of which are passing. Okay, back to our editor. Next will be public function gets number of pages, and again it's a test. And here we're going to start again with the pagination equals this pagination. We have 100 records, we want 10 per page, and we assert that we should get 10 when we run pagination number of pages, because if you divide 100 by 10, that should give us 10 pages. We save it, run a test, and there we go, 4 tests, 5 assertions. Okay, next one is going to check if we only have 1 page. So public function checks if has only 1 page. And here we're going to start with the pagination equals this pagination, 10 records and 10 per page. That should give us only 1 page. So this we are asserting that, actually rather than equals, let's use assert true this time. When we run pagination has only 1 page, because obviously this method returns boolean true or false. So let's try that. And there we go, 5 tests, 6 assertions, and all of them are passing again. Okay, back to the editor. The next test will check whether the pagination identifies the non-first page. So public function identifies non-first page. Test, and let's just set it to get page to the 3rd page, and then pagination equals this pagination. We're going to say we have 200 records, 10 per page, default key, so it's going to be this page. And then we're going to go for this assert false when we run pagination is first page. It should not be the first page because we indicate that we're on the 3rd one. So let's run this test. 6 assertions, 6 tests, 7 assertions, all of which are passing again. Now we're going to do similar thing. I'm just going to duplicate this test, but we won't have parameter indicating which page we are on. So let's remove it, rename the method to identifies first page this time. And this time assertion should be true when we call is first page, because obviously our URI, our query string, will not contain the number of a page. In other words, this is first page. If we go back to it, we'll check if the current page equals 1, and the current page, if we just scroll up, get current page checks if the current page is null, and it will be, then it will return 1, and obviously we're comparing later on if this current page equals 1, and that will return true. That's why this assertion should pass. So if we go back to the terminal, let's run this test, and there we go, 7 tests, 8 assertions, all of which are passing. The next method, we're going to do the same set for the last page. So public function identifies non-last page. And here we're going to start with get again page equals 3, and again pagination equals this pagination with 210 records per page, and then this assert false when we call pagination is last page. And obviously that should be false because we have 200 records, 10 records per page gives us 20 pages. We're on a 3rd one, so obviously we quite far away from the 20th page yet. So if we save it, run the test, and there we go, 8 tests, 9 assertions. So now let's duplicate this method and rename it to identifies last page. Let's make it easy for ourselves. 10th page, 100 records divided by 10 should give us 10. And now this should return true when we call this is last page. Let's just go back to the terminal, call the test, and it fails. It says that failed asserting that false is true. So this is last page returns false instead of true, and it should return true. So let's just quickly check this method again. It checks for identity between current, which is of an integer type, and pages count. Let's just quickly check when we setting this pages count, and yes, we are setting this with this sale function, which actually returns float. So this is why it's failing. If we type hint to integer, making sure that rather than float we get integer, now if we run this test again, and there we go, it passes. Okay, let's go back. We can close this class, we can close this one. The next test, public function identifies current page. So now we're going to check this other method which checks for the current page. We start with get page, we set it to 10th page, and then pagination equals this pagination, 100 records, 10 per page, and we're gonna go for this assert true, and pagination is current page, and we say we're checking against the 10th page, and yes, we're on the 10th page, so that should return true. If we save it and run the test, and there we go, 10 tests, 11 assertions. Okay, so back to our editor. Now another thing, actually, let's straight away do the same, but let's now assert false when we call pagination is current page, but let's set it to 12. This should return false because we have 10 for the page in a query string. So let's run this test again, and there we go, 10 tests, 12 assertions. Back to our editor. The next method will basically check whether we get the instance of the request when we call the request method on our pagination instance. So public function returns instance of request, and we start with pagination equals this pagination, 100 records, default is 10 per page anyway. So this assert instance of request, illuminate HTTP request, and then class. So that's going to give us the full name of the class, including the namespace when we call pagination request. And let's just import this request here, run having this inline. And if I just split screen, just so you just to make sure that obviously you use this use statement before the test, the class declaration here, obviously illuminate HTTP request. That's what we're expecting to get when we call this request method. If we save it, run the test, and there we go, 11 tests, 13 assertions. Back to the editor. This time we're going to test this URL method. So public function returns page URL. Test, and again pagination equals this pagination, 100 records, 10 per page. We actually don't have to even put this 10 per page, because if I just check this method again just to confirm, obviously 10 is the default one. So then we're gonna go for this assert equals it should return http :// a local host question mark page equals 9 when we try and call pagination URL method with 9 as an argument. That's what we should return. Why localhost? Well, because if we open our PHP unit XML, you'll see that by default our HTTP host and server name are set to localhost. Depending on what your server setup is, one of these variables should be available. That's why a localhost is what we get in the URL, basically. So http :// whatever we have one of these variables set to, then question mark page equals, which is what this URL method takes care of. So that's what we should get. Let's now run this test, and there we go, 12 tests, 14 assertions, all of which are passing. back to the editor. So next three and last three tests that we're going to have here will test for the previous, current, and next page URL. So public function returns previous page URL test, and here what we're going to do is set get page to 3, and then pagination equals this pagination 100 records 10 per page. So we don't put the second argument because 10 is default. So this assert equals, and we should get http://local host again, then / page equals to when we call pagination previous page previous URL. Because we're on a third page, the previous should be second one. So if we run it, save it, and there we go, 13 tests, 15 assertions. Next one, let's duplicate this one. Returns current page URL. So if we're in a third one, that should return page 3. Obviously, the method we call now is current URL. If we save it, run it, 14 tests, 16 assertions, all of which are passing great. And the last test, and again, I'm going to duplicate this last one, returns next page URL. So 300 records, 10 per page. Next page should be the fourth one. So for when we call next URL, that's what we should receive. Okay, save it, run it, 15 tests, 17 assertions, all of which are passing, and we have now completed our tests for the pagination class. Let's move to the next video.